Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I had planned a 3-day trip up north for the coming spring, camping in the wilds north of the rural municipality of Canwood, Saskatchewan, Canada. We had planned this trip since Christmas. We assumed the snow would be completely gone, but our trail was really slushy and it was very cold. So the original 3 nights were cut to 2. We saddled up our horses and headed out. The first tip-off that this trip wouldn't be fun was our horses. My trusty old white gelding was off his rocker. He'd never been aggressive, ever. But he was wailing, bucking, and biting the moment we got onto the trail. My friend's horse, who was usually the energetic one, stayed completely silent and hung his head the whole way to the first stop. When the sun started setting, we found a patch of trees to make a pen around. We used this electrified cord that connects to a battery. Then when I unsaddled my boy and put him in the enclosure, he calmed down and grazed alongside his buddy. While I tended the horses, my friend set up the tent and noticed that my bedroll was gone, along with my hat. This made no sense, as I had tied them to my saddle earlier. So I looked around and couldn't find them near us. Then I went back to my saddle and noticed that the leather cord that tied the items down had been crudely sawed in half. I thought it had snapped along the trail. I walked up from the small valley we were in and looked around. I found my hat about 80 feet from where we had followed the trail in. I had thought it might have flown away when I was riding until I picked it up. It stank terribly. Really, really bad. It smelled like a mix of burnt hair and rotten milk. I held it far away from me and went back to the camp. When I got there, my friend said that he left to chop wood, came back, and the boots he left outside of the tent were moved and stank too, with the same smell. By this point, we assumed a skunk was around. But it did not smell like skunk, my friend pointed out. Indeed, it was way more putrid. It was so bad we resorted to piling snow on the items just to block the stink. My friend began getting scared, wondering if an infected wolf was out there. I laughed because I knew this area well, and no wolves live around there, too many farmers with shotguns. Besides that, no animal, other than a skunk, would so thoroughly stink up the place. I thought it may have been a small animal that was sick, marking its territory. I've seen coyotes do similar things. But coyotes would never come that close to humans, foreign objects. But we dismissed it as harmless and went to bed. The next morning we saddled up the horses and noticed that my friend's mare was covered in leaves. But they stuck to her skin with what looked like tree sap. She got really angry when we peeled them off, even trying to bite me, as if she was protecting them. We looked around and couldn't find any sap leaking, and my horse was still clean. This was the point when my friend brought up woodland creatures, spirits, and how they're known to do this. I really don't like to believe in such things, but the way that his horse had protected the leaves and was licking at the sap made me wonder. It'd be nice if it was a good omen, because my hat certainly was not. My poor friend had to wear those boots, too. But we rode on and set up another camp the next night. We settled in without anything unusual happening. The horses were calm, the wind had settled, and the stench had almost gone from our stuff. But then I went to relieve myself at about 3 a.m., and before I turned behind a tree, I smelled the same rancid odor as before. I was nervous now, because whatever was making that foul odor had followed us. I was really scared that it may have been a cougar that wandered too far south because of the long winter. I went back and grabbed the small hunting rifle we brought, and told my friend where I was going. I went around a tree and finished my business, then got back up and looked around, gun on hip. A shadow moved slowly behind a tree about 40 to 50 feet away. I hummed slowly, hoping to hear it move, breath, so I could figure out what it was. The thing perfectly echoed my melody, but it had a guttural sound to it. Okay, definitely not a cougar. But my heart began to pound as I realized that nothing could do that but a person. I yelled, "Who's there?" and then the rotting odor came back. So strong that I began to heave. My friend was calling out from the cabin for me. I kept my eyes on the tree. The thing stood behind and called out again, covering my nose. The leaves crunched and it hummed again. I was beginning to cry and back up towards the tent. The horses were letting out really low, rumbling nickers, which made me more uncomfortable because horses only do that when they're happy. And I certainly wasn't. My friend ran to my side just in time for me to keel over and vomit. He also was on the verge of sickness, but he pointed the flashlight around and yelled out into the trees. The thing ran, the leaves crunched behind it. And I kid you not, what I saw looked like a man, but with an animal's head. It was so dark, so I might be wrong. But, dear God, I know what I saw. It looked like a satyr being from Greek mythology. It was about the height of a man. Its legs looked like those of a horse or goat, and its limbs were skinny. And it was hairy, especially on its head.
My great-uncle owns a lot of land in northern Saskatchewan, Canada. Some of this was pasture that he uses for cattle, but half of one of his largest properties is fenced off and the cows can't go there. In the sectioned-off lactose-free zone, the entire place is densely packed with foliage. The ground itself is blotted with some small steep hills towards the entrance to the property. There is one main dirt road that goes from a Texas gate at the entrance all the way back to the farthest side of the property. Coming off the road in the hilly area, we have a camp. The camp consists of an ATCO trailer. We've always had lots of wildlife, like big cats and bears that could harm people. I actually had to put down a bear that came into our camp and was far too comfortable with people not too long after. I learned to recognize the sounds and sights around me, and while cautious, I'm rarely afraid of anything out there. Regardless of the seemingly lack of disturbances, we always were careful at night, making sure to have a bright light and keep looking out for anything. After the first week, we began hearing noises around the camp very late at night that would drive the dog insane all night, to the point we just had to keep her inside. It almost felt like whatever it was probing and checking out our camp nightly, but always staying far enough away and hidden enough that we could never see it with our spotlights. Then one night, I left my mother's camper a couple hours after the daylight had disappeared with a lantern-style LED light. I didn't have anything to defend myself. No gun, no bear spray, not even a knife. So I was a little bit more cautious and observant than usual, given I felt more vulnerable. As I walked from the exit of my mom's camper, I looked around for a minute, scanning the tree line. I then began the loop around to my door. I panned as I walked from right to left, from the entrance to the fire pit and then to the table. It was there, just behind the table, not 20 feet away, that I saw a naked, extremely pale, almost gray, lanky humanoid figure standing still and directly facing me. As it caught my gaze, I felt my heart drop and immediately went cold. I probably only stared for 3 seconds at most, but it felt like several minutes as my brain processed what I was seeing. It stood somewhere between 6 and 7.5 feet tall, with low slumped shoulders, and had a frail, thin body that reminded me of photos from Unit 731, but with disproportionately long limbs. I ran like my life depended on it, the last few feet to my door. Once inside, I grabbed the shotgun, stuffed several shells in my pocket, and loaded the gun aimed at the door. I sat in silence with the hammer and walked back, waiting for the doorknob to turn or the frosted glass to break. I sat and waited for hours into the early morning, expecting to see or hear something, but I never did. Not even any foliage moving or items moving. Eventually, around 4 a.m., I lowered my guard, propped the shotgun next to my bed, and hesitantly went to sleep. When I woke up, I hardly believed in what I saw the night before. I was around the area to see if there were any shapes or items that I could have mistaken and warped in my mind. I'm not really sure what I saw, but I know it wasn't human. The photos and drawings of these crawlers reminded me a great deal of it. So I thought I'd share that. Maybe one of you could enlighten me as to what it could have been doing, or its intent, or provide an explanation to its behavior.
It was May 3rd, 2008, I'm pretty sure. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. I was at my fiance's mom's farm near Kisby in southeast Saskatchewan. I was out late with a buddy, sitting on the deck. It was a nice, warm, clear night, a good night to just sit back and look at the stars while we talked about our alien theories and whatnot. Anyways, at around 2 o'clock, we noticed a set of lights out in the field behind the house. They were about 600 to 700 yards away and very low to the ground from what we could see. We stared at them for about 10 minutes, trying to figure out what they were. They appeared to be moving in a circular motion and flashing in a pattern from left to right. We decided to get a better view, so we walked up to a nearby hill and crouched down, but when we did, all other lights around faded out of sight except for the rotating lights. At first we thought it was a semi on a dirt road, but it just sat there and was far too long to be a semi at such a far distance. So we decided to walk back to the house. As we got back onto the deck, we saw a bright flash of light shoot off into the sky. The light looked like it came from the object in the field. The light looked kind of like a flare, but it was in the shape of what looked like Pac-Man. It only lasted a few seconds and then faded, and at about that time we started to hear twigs snapping in the trees all around the house and what sounded like light footsteps in the tall grass. We went inside and grabbed a flashlight. When we got outside, we walked close to the tree line looking for whatever was in the bushes, and then out of nowhere our flashlight died, but we kept going. I didn't want to seem like a baby in front of my buddy. Anyways, every time we got close to the tree line, we would hear a sound on the opposite side of us. When we went towards the sound, it would move to another part of the tree line, almost like there was multiple creatures in the bush, and they would make noise anytime we got close to one so that we couldn't see it. We did this for about a half hour. By the time we got back to the deck it was almost 3:30 a.m. We were already scared. My buddy came up with a little test to see if we were alone. He is very smart and clever in his mind, but what he would do is yell out, "If you can understand me, snap a twig," and sure enough we heard a loud snap come from the trees. I jumped and said a few bad words. Then we decided to try another test. We went to one side of the yard and ran to the other side. As we did, we heard something crash through the bushes toward us as if it was eager to follow us, but it stayed in the bushes. We were so scared that in mid-run we turned on a dime and ran towards the house in fear. We went back onto the deck and sat for a minute to catch our breath and analyze in our heads what we just heard. After a few minutes we decided to walk down the ramp behind the house that led around the house to the driveway. As we got to the corner of the house we saw something standing in the driveway. We could not see its face, but it just stood there. We stared at it for about 30 seconds or so. When we heard a low whine noise come from behind us we turned to look, but found nothing. When we looked back to see the creature standing in the driveway, it was gone. The creature was about 6'3" or so. It had long arms and a round head, but had no clothing from what we could see. Anyways, as I was saying, I was scared. I really wanted to go inside, so we decided to go inside. We walked towards the house. We had our backs toward the house staring at the driveway when out of nowhere we heard what sounded like a loud gust of wind that slammed a bush near the front door right up against the house, and it was loud. I did a full 360 jump. When we looked at the bush it was pretty much pressed up against the house. I was shaking so bad I had to sit down. When I was on the ground my buddy was in front of me talking to me. As I looked up at him I saw a large black shadow on the roof looking down at us. As I told him to look, it darted away. It was really fast. I got up and we ran to the back of the house to see what it was, but there was nothing. At about that time, we noticed a large object in the shape of a triangle move across the sky above the house. It had 3 lights on it, one on each corner, but there was no sound. We could feel a slight vibration on the ground, but yet no sound. It moved very slow, about 10 miles an hour. Then all of a sudden a bright light illuminated the yard and it sped off heading south at an incredible speed. Then it was gone. A strong sulfur smell filled the air. In total shock we went inside and down to my buddy's room, so that we could regroup and get our minds straight so we could figure out what just happened. We did not sleep for the rest of the night. We were too scared. About 3 nights later my buddy woke up gasping for air, and it was loud enough to wake me, and I was in another room. I went to see if he was okay. He said he could not remember his dream, but it felt like something was pressing really hard on his chest. And then once again the strong sulfur smell filled the room, but only for about 2 minutes. After that, for about 3 weeks we had weird dreams, constantly smelled sulfur and saw weird lights in the sky almost every night. I had one dream that was exactly the same for 2 nights in a row. I dreamed that I was abducted and taken to a strange place where I was stuck with a needle-like object in the corner of my eye. I could not speak, scream, or move. Then everything would go black and I'd wake up. When I would wake up it would be morning, but it felt like I only slept for a few minutes. To this day we still see strange lights in the sky. Others have witnessed it as well, but I will never forget that night ever. It was the most frightening thing I have ever gone through.
In my late teens and early 20s, several other people and myself saw weird, hairy, monkey-like hands scrabbling beneath the space between the floor and the bottom of the door leading to the basement of our family home. That is where my bedroom, my brother's bedroom, a games room and a bathroom was. We lived in North Battleford, Saskatchewan at the time. Definitely not a tropical area, as Saskatchewan is smack in the middle of Canada and our winters are long and freezing cold. It is a small prairie city without a zoo of any kind. This phenomenon was seen on more than one occasion and was always witnessed by several others. I remember it occurring in late summer or early fall, always in the late afternoon or early evening, never late at night. The hands were small, sort of like a spider monkey's would be, but different, more human looking. They were covered with dark brown to black hair and had long jointed humanoid fingers with long darkish human-like fingernails. The small arms were visible from just below where the elbow would be, the forearms of the creatures, I guess. Both times I saw them they reached beneath the bottom of the door and scrambled back and forth across the floor aggressively. There were 2 of the creatures. They made loud scratching noises. It scared the hell out of everyone, causing pandemonium with everyone screaming and freaking out. I would feel compelled to calm them down. So gathering every ounce of courage I could muster, I would whip the door open, but nothing would be there. As I said, each time I saw these things I was with other people. The first time it was me and my girlfriend, and the next time, me, my little brother and 3 cousins. I was always the one to open the door, even though I too was terrified. There was never any evidence of wild animals being in the house. No hair or destruction that surely would have occurred had wild animals somehow invaded our premises. We had a dog and a cat that most certainly would have reacted if wild animals were inside. The creatures we saw, well, partially saw, felt wrong, weird and unnatural. The experience was extremely frightening and definitely had a sense of evil attached to it. I am wondering if anyone else out there has ever had a similar sighting. I am totally baffled by what we witnessed, but know without a shadow of a doubt that the things we saw were not wild animals.
The image album link for the following tale is in the description.
Here in Saskatchewan, ghost stories and legends run wild due to its history and settings. Terrain that changes from kilometers of flat prairies to hills and valleys. Among these varying settings, one can easily discover abandoned towns that died with the folks who lived in them, empty houses from the turn of the century, farms that were forgotten after the drought of the 1930s, and particularly, hauntings. Several books have been written detailing the history of the vast plains and empty communities, and the darkness that resides within. Everything from accidents to murder are the framework of each ghost story, and those who have lived here long enough not only hear these tales, but regard them as absolute fact. I had been staying at my girlfriend's house in a small mining community known as Esterhazy. Esterhazy itself rests only several hundred feet above a very prosperous potash mine, which in itself has a dark history of accidents and death. On the surface, Esterhazy is a peaceful, yet gossipy, town whose residents are heavily involved in the many churches, as well as bars. The town of Esterhazy is influenced by its Ukrainian roots, and the many historical sites within the limits are a testament to its rich, religious history. The story I plan to tell, for the most part, disregards Esterhazy, although one must wonder if the several haunts and legends that leave a heavy atmosphere on the town makes this story more fact than fiction. My girlfriend and I were staying together for a week in Esterhazy, and being the adventurous character I am, I pestered her for days on any good locations for urban exploring. She had shown me all the historic sites, and even took me out to the maze, a patch of forest 10 minutes outside of town, off a gravel road, that seems to have an old dirt path carved through it which, from a curious wanderer's point of view, seems to split off into other sections of the forest, and almost always ending with a dead end. Stories from the locals range from a playful farmer, to a gateway to hell being at the very end of the maze. In the end, she reluctantly told me of a place, not far from the maze, that is abandoned. A tall, turn-of-the-century home that many of the youngins call Percy's Palace. The story of Percy's Palace varies. Some say that it was a home in which its occupants got up and left unexpectedly, leaving their things behind. A much more sinister story is of Percy, a benevolent man who was known by locals to be an alcoholic and possibly insane. In the period of time that Percy had supposedly lived, he was outcast by locals due to rumors of being a Minecraft YouTuber, and when a time came where children had seemed to go missing, Percy was blamed by all of the town folk for being the one who took them. In other words, Percy was a 1960s Freddy Krueger. Whether or not Percy had ever been involved in the kidnappings is entirely up to one's mind. No evidence had ever been linked to Percy, and the bodies of the children were never found. As the story goes, Percy ended up taking his own life inside of his basement. Locals claim that Percy still wanders the giant house, and those who go there to party end up being shooed out by shrieks and slamming doors. Another odd curiosity with Percy's Palace is that those who attend his home in their vehicles will more often than come back to their vehicles to find it ransacked. People claim that this could be due to a farmer nearby. However, there are no farms in the area for another 4 kilometers. The night was bitterly cold, in the dead of January. It was snowing heavily, and a wind came through that chilled you to the bone. My girlfriend, her friend and I left Esterhazy for the palace around 11:30 p.m. It was a short drive, as a large part of the trip was on foot through very deep snow. We had made sure to bundle up efficiently, and had only our phones and my camera to give us light. The flashlight we had brought with us mysteriously died as we left the car. Along with this story, I shall post pictures of the adventure at the end. We trudged through the snow and darkness for several minutes, until we reached a clearing through the brush that revealed a large wooden barn nearly torn to pieces on the ground, and a large, faded wooden house. The palace was approximately 3 stories tall, counting the rather spacey attic. The area itself produced an eerie silence, and as soon as the house had come into view, I snapped photos fervently. The front of the palace was completely overgrown by trees and brush that one had to suffer scrapes from twigs and branches just to get onto the porch. Getting onto the porch was a different matter. Approximately 3-4 feet off the ground, the only boost one could get was an old, snow-covered brick. After testing the deck to make sure we weren't going to fall through, we made our way through the open doorway, the door literally hanging off its hinges. Instantly the smell of must and mold mixed in with the smell of cold we were so accustomed to. It was oddly dark inside. Of course, it was dark outside as well, but for some reason, the dark seemed almost thick inside of the house. There was a heavy atmosphere that seemed to cry. It was and still is very difficult to explain the emotion of the old house. It was as though there was a different cold there. A cold that didn't just chill your bones, but froze your soul. We toured through the main floor, seeing couches and chairs, an old bed, even an old stove. By the looks of it, it was thought someone was living there, but up and left, and over time dust and mold began to take hold of it. The most obvious signs of human contamination were several empty bottles of alcohol strewn about, as well as minor graffiti. Chairs and tables were thrown about, and garbage had been piled by the front door. If I was a ghost here, would be pretty pissed if some teenagers came into my home and messed it up, too. The one thing on the main floor I took notice of was the door to the basement. It was sealed shut. All doors in the house were either open or not attached to the frame. After some time, we were able to push open the basement door only to discover that the stairs to the basement didn't exist. All that was there was darkness, even our lights could penetrate it. We went upstairs to the second floor up a small staircase, which I was certain would collapse, but we made it up nonetheless. The second floor was almost a maze. It was hard to make out the floor plan because it seemed that each room led to other rooms which led to other hallways which led to closets and smaller rooms. It seemed unnatural and almost impossibly large. Perhaps it was the darkness and the feeling of being in a foreign place, but it didn't feel right. Each of the rooms we came across were either empty or torn apart. One room in particular, 5th and 6th from the bottom in the link, had a door that led outside. Of course, as soon as I opened the door I found that there weren't any stairs. It was a straight drop down with nothing but snow at the bottom. Another weird feature of the room were these dark stains all over the walls. To my mind, it looked like blood, but looking back I realize it was probably mold. We thought that our little adventure was over, but then I discovered in one of the closets, a tiny staircase leading to the attic. The stairs winded upwards and were wide enough just to fit you. My girlfriend and my friend didn't want to go up, but being the curious person I am, I led the way. The attic was large. It had rafters that reminded me of a church ceiling, and a large brick chute going through the center. The place was completely trashed. It seemed that this was the place where most people hung out. All sorts of junk hung about. Although the weirdest thing we found was an old yellow dress that could have fit my girlfriend. At this point I started to joke around and started calling out Percy. I joked that he needed a maid, and maybe somebody from Trading Spaces to come and fix it up. My girlfriend was getting freaked out and decided to leave, followed by her friend. I decided to try and provoke Percy. I called him names, I swore, I called him a Minecraft YouTuber. Several seconds later, I heard a loud crash below me and my girlfriend and her friend scream. I jumped down the stairs to find them bolting down the second set of stairs. When I caught up with them, they said that they heard someone running towards them followed by the door behind them slamming shut. I tried to tell them that it was probably the wind that did it until her friend pointed out the basement door. It was shut. We approached it and tried to open it, but it was sealed once again. Her friend and I tried kicking it open, but it wouldn't budge. As soon as we had given up, we heard a loud bang against the other side of the door. By this point I am scared as well, and we decide to leave. Before we left, however, we heard yelling. Faint, but audible yellowing coming from above. Followed by footsteps and a door closing. The hairs are standing up on my neck and I tell them to run. We ran like Kenyans back to the car, but as I ran I turned around a few times to snap one more picture of the house, the final picture in the link. My girlfriend seemed distant for the rest of the night, and when I asked what was wrong later on, she said that when she was in the attic she felt someone rubbing their hands up and down her legs slowly. When she tried to leave the attic she swears she felt something touch her face gently and whisper her name. We plan to never go back.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.